On the morning of May 27, 1941, in the North Atlantic approximately 400 nautical miles west of Brest, France, the German battleship Bismarck ceased to exist as a fighting vessel. This engagement represented the culmination of an 8-day naval operation that would fundamentally alter British and German naval strategy for the remainder of World War II. The destruction of this 50,000-ton warship, along with over 2,000 crew members, marked the effective end of Germany's surface fleet offensive operations in the Atlantic theater. Before we examine the operational details of this engagement, it's essential to understand the political and military context that led to Bismarck's construction. If you're interested in evidence-based World War II history, with precise military details and archival documentation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment indicating where you're watching from. We have viewers from 47 countries who contribute to our historical discussions. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, imposed severe restrictions on German naval construction. Germany was limited to vessels no larger than 10,000 tons displacement, with no battleships or submarines permitted. These constraints remained in effect until 1935, when Adolf Hitler unilaterally renounced these treaty limitations. According to declassified German naval archives, Hitler authorized the Z Plan in January 1939, a 10-year naval construction program designed to challenge British maritime superiority. The Bismarck-class battleships represented the first phase of this expansion. Naval architects at the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg received the construction contract in 1936. The design parameters called for a vessel capable of engaging British capital ships while possessing sufficient speed to evade superior forces. Kriegsmarine planning documents from 1936 indicate the ship was designed for commerce raiding operations, attacking Allied merchant convoys in the Atlantic rather than seeking fleet-on-fleet engagements. The technical specifications reveal the engineering priorities of German naval designers. The vessel measured 251 meters in length with a beam of 36 meters. Full load displacement reached 50,300 tons, significantly exceeding the 35,000-ton limit established by the Washington Naval Treaty, though Germany was not a signatory. The armor scheme employed Krupp cemented steel, with belt armor reaching 320 millimeters thickness and deck armor varying from 50 to 120 millimeters, depending on location. Primary armament consisted of 8 38-centimeter SKC-34 guns arranged in 4 twin turrets, designated Anton, Bruno, Caesar, and Dora from bow to stern. These weapons could engage targets at ranges exceeding 35 kilometers, firing 800-kilogram armor-piercing shells. Secondary armament included 12 15-centimeter guns for use against cruisers and destroyers, along with extensive anti-aircraft batteries comprising 16 10.5-centimeter and 16 3.7-centimeter weapons. Propulsion came from 12 Wagner high-pressure boilers, driving 3 Brown Boveri-geared turbines, generating 148,000 shaft horsepower. This power plant could propel the vessel to 30 knots, though operational speeds typically remained around 28 knots to conserve fuel. The ship carried 8,100 tons of fuel oil, providing an operational range of approximately 8,900 nautical miles at 19 knots. Construction commenced in July 1936. The hull was launched in February 1939, with Adolf Hitler attending the ceremony. Fitting out continued through 1940, with sea trials conducted in the Baltic Sea during the autumn of that year. The vessel was officially commissioned into the Kriegsmarine on August 24, 1940, under the command of Kapitän zur See Ernst Lindemann. Lindemann brought considerable experience to this command. Born in 1894, he had served in the Imperial German Navy during World War I and continued his career through the interwar period. Naval records indicate he was regarded as a competent officer with strong technical knowledge, though some colleagues questioned his aggressive tactical preferences. To understand the strategic situation facing Bismarck in May 1941, we must examine the Royal Navy's force structure and operational priorities at this stage of the war. Britain's naval supremacy had declined from its World War I peak, but the Royal Navy still maintained numerical superiority over the Kriegsmarine. In May 1941, the Home Fleet, responsible for North Atlantic operations, included 5 capital ships: the battleships King George V, Prince of Wales, Rodney and Ramillies, plus the battlecruiser Hood. Additionally, Force H, operating from Gibraltar, included the battlecruiser Renown and the battleship Malaya. The battlecruiser Hood deserves particular attention given its role in subsequent events. Commissioned in 1920, this vessel represented World War I era design philosophy, heavy armament combined with high speed at the expense of armor protection. The ship measured 262 meters in length with a displacement of 46,780 tons at full load. 8 38-centimeter guns provided main armament comparable to contemporary battleships. However, Hood possessed a critical vulnerability. The horizontal deck armor measured only 76 millimeters over the magazines, insufficient protection against plunging fire at long ranges. Royal Navy architects had planned to upgrade this armor during a scheduled refit, but the outbreak of war prevented this modification. Despite this known weakness, Hood remained the largest warship in the Royal Navy and held tremendous symbolic value for British public morale. The Prince of Wales represented modern design philosophy, being the second of the King George V class battleships. This vessel had only commissioned in March 1941, and civilian contractors were still aboard working on defects when it departed for combat operations. The ship mounted 10 35.6-centimeter guns in an unusual configuration: 1 quad turret forward, 1 quad turret aft, and 1 twin turret forward. This arrangement had experienced mechanical problems during sea trials, problems that remained unresolved in May 1941. British naval strategy in spring 1941 focused on convoy protection. The United Kingdom imported approximately 50 million tons of supplies annually by sea, including food, fuel, and raw materials essential for war production. German U-boats had sunk 2.3 million tons of Allied shipping between January and May 1941, according to Admiralty records. The deployment of a major surface raider into the Atlantic convoy lanes threatened to dramatically increase these losses. The Royal Navy had developed procedures for countering surface raiders. When intelligence indicated a German capital ship had departed port, the Admiralty would establish patrol lines across potential routes to the Atlantic. Aircraft from Coastal Command would conduct reconnaissance flights, while cruisers equipped with radar would maintain surveillance. Once located, battleships would converge to engage the raider, while destroyers attempted torpedo attacks. This system relied heavily on intelligence collection. The Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley Park had achieved some success in decrypting German naval communications, though coverage remained incomplete in spring 1941. Photo reconnaissance by RAF aircraft provided important information about German naval bases. Additionally, British intelligence maintained networks of observers in Norway who could report ship movements. In late April 1941, the Kriegsmarine's Fleet Command finalized plans for Operation Rheinübung, an Atlantic commerce raiding mission utilizing Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen. Admiral Günther Lutyens received command of this operation. Lutyens had extensive experience with Atlantic operations, having commanded successful raids using the battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau between January and March 1941. Those vessels had sunk or captured 22 merchant ships totaling 115,000 tons before returning to Brest. However, Lutyens had expressed concern about operating battleships in the Atlantic, given British numerical superiority and improving radar technology. The operational plan called for Bismarck and Prinz Eugen to break through the Denmark Strait or the Iceland-Faroe Passage, then proceed to the Atlantic convoy routes. The ships would avoid engagement with British capital ships if possible, focusing instead on attacking merchant vessels. German Navy records indicate the mission was expected to last 8 to 12 weeks, with replenishment from supply ships positioned in the Atlantic. Prinz Eugen, commanded by Kapitän zur See Helmuth Brinkmann, was a heavy cruiser of the Admiral Hipper class. Displacing 18,750 tons at full load, the ship mounted 8 20.3-centimeter guns and could sustain 32 knots. Its primary role was reconnaissance and engaging escort vessels, allowing Bismarck to attack merchant ships. The departure was scheduled for May 18, 1941. Both vessels would depart from Gdynia, Poland, then called Gotenhafen, proceed through the Baltic Sea, refuel in Norway, then attempt the Denmark Strait passage during late May, when extended daylight hours in those latitudes would aid navigation. Intelligence assessments available to German commanders in May 1941 indicated the Royal Navy had dispersed its forces. The Mediterranean required substantial British naval presence due to operations in Greece and Crete. Several British capital ships were undergoing refit. German planners believed Hood and one King George V-class battleship represented the only immediately available opposition in the North Atlantic. However, this assessment underestimated British intelligence capabilities and the Royal Navy's ability to concentrate forces rapidly. Moreover, the operational plan contained a fundamental vulnerability. It provided no contingency for significant damage to either German vessel. The nearest repair facilities were in occupied France, over 2,000 miles from the planned operational area. If either ship sustained damage requiring dockyard repair, the mission would fail. On May 18, 1941, Bismarck and Prinz Eugen departed Gdynia at 0200 hours. The vessels proceeded through the Baltic Sea, passing through the Kattegat between Denmark and Sweden on May 20th. A Swedish cruiser observed the German ships and reported their presence, though Swedish neutrality prevented direct notification to Britain. The German squadron arrived at Korsfjord near Bergen, Norway, on May 21st. Both vessels refueled from a tanker, though significantly, Bismarck did not top off its fuel tanks completely. Post-war analysis suggests this decision may have reflected concern about air attack while stationary in the fjord. This incomplete refueling would have significant consequences later in the operation. British reconnaissance detected the German ships in Norway. An RAF Spitfire from Coastal Command photographed both vessels in Korsfjord on the afternoon of May 21st. These photographs reached the Admiralty by evening, confirming that a major German surface operation was underway. Admiral Sir John Tovey, commanding the Home Fleet from HMS King George V, immediately activated contingency plans. The battlecruiser Hood and the battleship Prince of Wales, already at Scapa Flow, received orders to proceed to the Denmark Strait. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland commanded this force from Hood. Simultaneously, the cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Suffolk, already patrolling the Denmark Strait, received instructions to maintain surveillance for German vessels attempting the passage. The Denmark Strait, between Iceland and Greenland, represented the most direct route to the Atlantic. The passage measured approximately 180 nautical miles wide, though ice flows typically reduced the navigable width to about 50 miles. Fog and poor visibility were common. The Royal Navy maintained patrol cruisers in this area specifically to detect breakout attempts. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen departed Norway on the evening of May 21st. The ships proceeded north along the Norwegian coast before turning west toward the Denmark Strait. Admiral Lutyens elected to attempt passage on May 23rd, timing the transit for evening hours to reduce visibility. At 19:22 hours on May 23rd, HMS Suffolk detected Bismarck and Prinz Eugen on radar at a range of approximately 13 nautical miles. The cruiser immediately transmitted a sighting report while maneuvering to maintain contact. HMS Norfolk joined Suffolk shortly afterward, and both cruisers began shadowing the German vessels from beyond visual range, using radar to track their position. This radar-directed shadowing represented a significant technological advantage for the Royal Navy. British Type 284 radar could detect large vessels at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers, allowing cruisers to maintain contact even in poor visibility. The German ships possessed radar, but their Fumo 23 sets had inferior range and reliability compared to British equipment. Admiral Lutyens faced a difficult decision. The German ships could turn back, attack the shadowing cruisers, or proceed into the Atlantic with British forces tracking their position. Attacking the cruisers would consume time and fuel while potentially revealing his position to additional British forces. Lutyens chose to continue, apparently believing he could evade the cruisers once in the Atlantic. Vice Admiral Holland positioned Hood and Prince of Wales, to intercept the German squadron based on the sighting reports from Norfolk and Suffolk. The British force proceeded southwest at high speed through the night of May 23rd-24th, calculating an interception position for dawn on May 24th. At 05:35 hours on May 24th, lookouts on Prince of Wales sighted the German ships at a range of approximately 17 nautical miles. Holland immediately ordered his ships to turn toward the enemy, increasing speed to 28 knots. The tactical situation presented Holland with several challenges. The approach angle meant the British ships could only bring their forward turrets to bear, 4 guns on Hood and 6 guns on Prince of Wales. Turning to present broadside would allow all guns to fire, but would increase the approach time during which the German ships could fire without effective response. Holland chose to maintain the direct approach, accepting reduced firepower to close the range quickly. This decision related directly to Hood's armor vulnerability. At long ranges, shells follow a high trajectory, striking deck armor at steep angles. Hood's thin deck armor was vulnerable to this plunging fire. At shorter ranges, shells follow flatter trajectories, striking belt armor, where Hood's protection was adequate. Holland intended to close rapidly to minimize exposure to plunging fire. However, this tactical approach had a critical flaw. It assumed the German ships would fire at Hood, when in fact Prince Eugen was leading the German formation, with Bismarck following. In the early light and poor visibility, both British and German forces initially misidentified their opponents. At 05:52 hours, Hood opened fire at a range of 25,000 meters, targeting what Holland believed was Bismarck, but was actually Prince Eugen. Prince of Wales opened fire simultaneously. The German ships returned fire at 05:55 hours, with both initially targeting Hood. The gunnery on both sides demonstrated the advanced fire control systems of the era. Both British and German ships used optical rangefinders with base lengths exceeding 10 meters, coupled with mechanical computers that calculated firing solutions accounting for target speed, course, range, wind, and projectile ballistics. At 0600 hours, Hood executed a turn to port to bring all guns to bear. At precisely this moment, Bismarck's 5th salvo struck Hood. German naval records, along with testimony from surviving British personnel, indicate that at least one 38-centimeter shell penetrated Hood's deck armor in the area of the after magazines. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. The after ammunition magazines, containing propellant charges for the 38-centimeter guns, detonated. The force of this explosion broke the ship's back. Hood separated into 2 sections and sank in less than 3 minutes. Of the 418 personnel aboard, only 3 survived: Ordinary Signalman Ted Briggs, able seaman Bob Tilburn, and Midshipman William Dundas. These survivors were recovered by HMS Electra approximately 2 hours after the sinking. The loss of Hood was witnessed by personnel aboard Prince of Wales, which continued engaging the German ships. Prince of Wales struck Bismarck with 3 35.6-centimeter shells and 4 13.3-centimeter shells during this engagement. 2 of the heavy shells caused significant damage. One struck below the waterline in the bow area, allowing approximately 2,000 tons of seawater to enter the ship. This flooding reduced speed and contaminated fuel oil in forward tanks. A second shell penetrated the starboard side amidships, though it failed to detonate. However, Prince of Wales was experiencing severe mechanical problems. Several guns in the forward quad turret had jammed, reducing effective firepower. At 0609 hours, after sustaining several hits from both German ships, Prince of Wales turned away behind a smokescreen and broke off the engagement. Following the Denmark Strait engagement, Admiral Lutyens faced a critical decision. The operation's primary objective, reaching the Atlantic convoy lanes, remained achievable. However, Bismarck had sustained damage that reduced speed capability and fuel capacity. The flooding in the forward section limited speed to 28 knots, and the contaminated fuel oil reduced operational range. Captain José Lindemann recommended returning to Germany for repairs. Lutyens overruled this advice, deciding to proceed to the Atlantic and then make for French ports, specifically Brest or Saint-Nazaire, where dry dock facilities could accommodate Bismarck. This decision has been analyzed extensively in post-war historical scholarship. German naval protocols gave operational commanders considerable autonomy, but Lutyens' choice to continue exposed Bismarck to prolonged pursuit by superior British forces. Some historians argue Lutyens underestimated the Royal Navy's determination to avenge Hood's loss. The Royal Navy's response was indeed comprehensive. Admiral Tovey, aboard King George V, proceeded toward the last known position of the German ships at maximum speed. The battleship Rodney, which had been escorting a convoy, received orders to join the pursuit. The aircraft carrier Victorious, operating with the home fleet, prepared to launch torpedo bombers against Bismarck. Most significantly, Force H departed Gibraltar on May 24th. This squadron, commanded by Vice Admiral Sir James Somerville, included the battlecruiser Renown, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, and the cruiser Sheffield. Force H would steam north to establish blocking positions between Bismarck and the French ports. Throughout May 24th, the British cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk maintained radar contact with the German ships. This shadowing provided continuous position reports, allowing Admiral Tovey to calculate intercept courses. The German squadron maintained a southwesterly course, heading into the Atlantic at reduced speed. At 22:10 hours on May 24th, Lutyens made a tactical decision that briefly succeeded. Bismarck turned directly toward the shadowing cruisers, while Prince Eugen continued on course. The sudden turn toward the cruisers broke radar contact, as the reduced angle between the ships decreased the effective radar return. Suffolk lost contact for approximately 30 minutes before reacquiring Bismarck on radar. However, shortly after midnight on May 25th, Bismarck again turned toward the pursuers. This maneuver successfully broke contact, and for the next 31 hours, the Royal Navy lost track of Bismarck's position. Prince Eugen had separated earlier, proceeding independently toward a refueling rendezvous. That ship would eventually reach Brest on June 1st without further combat. The loss of contact created significant concern at the Admiralty. Without position information, British forces could not effectively intercept Bismarck. Admiral Tovey had to estimate the German ship's likely course based on possible objectives, either returning to Germany via the Denmark Strait or Iceland-Faroe Passage, or proceeding to France. The breakthrough in relocating Bismarck came from radio intelligence. At approximately 0900 hours on May 25th, Bismarck transmitted a lengthy radio message to Naval Group West Headquarters in Paris. British high-frequency direction-finding stations intercepted this transmission and calculated a bearing. When combined with analysis of the transmission's duration and signal strength, cryptanalysis staff estimated Bismarck's position with reasonable accuracy. This intelligence indicated Bismarck was heading southeast, toward France, not Germany. Admiral Tovey adjusted his fleet's course accordingly. However, the delay caused by the loss of contact had allowed Bismarck to establish a substantial lead. King George V's fuel situation was becoming critical, and Tovey calculated he could pursue only until approximately 800 hours on May 27th before being forced to return to base. On May 26, 1941, Admiral Tovey faced the possibility that Bismarck might reach French ports despite the Royal Navy's efforts. The German battleship maintained sufficient lead distance that British battleships could not close to gun range before Bismarck came under land-based Luftwaffe air cover from French bases. The responsibility for slowing Bismarck fell to the Fleet Air Arm torpedo bombers operating from HMS Ark Royal, which had sailed north from Gibraltar with Force H Ark Royal, carried approximately 60 aircraft, including Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers. The Swordfish represented obsolete technology by 1941 standards. This biplane design dated to the early 1930s, with a maximum speed of approximately 140 knots and a fabric-covered airframe. However, the aircraft possessed several advantages for torpedo attack. The slow speed and excellent low-speed handling allowed approaches in poor weather conditions that grounded more modern aircraft. The fabric covering was less susceptible to battle damage than metal structures, as shells often passed through without causing catastrophic structural failure. At 1450 hours on May 26th, Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish carrying 18-inch torpedoes. Weather conditions were poor, with low cloud cover, rain squalls, and rough seas. The aircraft located a ship on radar and attacked, only to discover they had targeted HMS Sheffield. the cruiser that had been detached to shadow Bismarck, once relocated. This mistaken attack failed to cause damage due to a fortunate malfunction. Several torpedoes exploded upon hitting the water, their magnetic detonators activated prematurely by the rough seas. The remaining torpedoes were successfully avoided by Sheffield. This incident led to an immediate change in torpedo arming procedures for the second attack wave, replacing magnetic detonators with contact detonators. At 1915 hours, Ark Royal launched a second strike of 15 Swordfish. These aircraft, led by Lieutenant Commander Tim Coode, located Bismarck at approximately 2047 hours. The German ship was approximately 700 nautical miles west of Brest, proceeding at 27 knots. The Swordfish attacked in waves through intense anti-aircraft fire. Bismarck's flak batteries included 16 10.5 centimeter guns, 16 3.7 centimeter guns, and multiple 2 centimeter weapons, creating a dense defensive barrier. However, the slow speed of the Swordfish created targeting difficulties for German gun directors designed for high-speed aircraft. 13 torpedoes missed their target. 2 struck Bismarck, 1 amidships with minimal effect and 1 on the starboard quarter near the stern. This second hit caused critical damage. The torpedo detonated adjacent to the steering machinery compartments, jamming the rudders at approximately 12 degrees to port. Damage control parties attempted to free the rudders, but found the damage too severe for shipboard repair. Bismarck could no longer steer using its rudders. The ship began steaming in a large circle, despite attempts to control direction using propeller revolutions and thrust distribution among the 3 propeller shafts. This damage fundamentally altered the tactical situation. Without steerage control, Bismarck could not maintain course toward Brest. Admiral Lutyens transmitted a message to Naval Group West at 2140 hours stating, "Ship unmaneuverable, we will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." Throughout the night of May 26-27th, British destroyers from the 4th Destroyer Flotilla conducted attacks on Bismarck. The destroyers Cossack, Sikh, Maori, Zulu, and the Polish ship Pioran approached to torpedo range, launching attacks while illuminating the German ship with searchlights and star shells. These attacks achieved no additional torpedo hits, but kept Bismarck's crew at action stations throughout the night, preventing rest and damage control efforts. Dawn on May 27th revealed Bismarck approximately 400 nautical miles west of Brest, still unable to steer and making erratic progress toward France. The British battleships King George V and Rodney, accompanied by cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, closed to engagement range. Admiral Tovey planned the attack carefully. King George V would engage from the north, while Rodney would attack from the west, creating a crossfire that would make evasive maneuvering difficult even if Bismarck regained steering control. The cruisers would remain at longer range, ready to deliver torpedo attacks if required. At 0847 hours, Rodney opened fire at a range of 23,000 meters. King George V opened fire 2 minutes later. The German ship returned fire at 0850 hours, with the first salvos falling close to Rodney. The British ships mounted substantial firepower. King George V carried 10 35.6 centimeter guns in the unusual quad-twin-quad arrangement, while Rodney, an older design from the 1920s, mounted 9 40.6 centimeter guns, the most powerful weapons in the Royal Navy. Combined, these ships could deliver approximately 13 tons of armor-piercing shells per broadside. Bismarck's fire control was damaged within the first few minutes of engagement. A direct hit on the forward fire control director killed or wounded the gunnery control team. The ship's main battery continued firing under local control from individual turrets, but accuracy declined significantly. By 0920 hours, all 4 of Bismarck's main battery turrets had been knocked out. Anton and Bruno turrets forward were destroyed by direct hits. Caesar turret amidships jammed after near misses damaged its training mechanisms. Dora turret aft continued firing longest, but was eventually silenced when its crew was killed by shell splinters penetrating the turret. The British ships closed to point-blank range, at times as close as 3,000 meters, and continued firing. Bismarck's superstructure was progressively demolished. The command tower, bridge, and fire control positions were destroyed. Fires burned throughout the upper works. However, the armored belt remained intact. and the ship stayed afloat. German accounts from survivors indicate that discipline largely held among the crew despite the hopeless situation. Damage control parties continued attempting to contain flooding and fight fires even as the ship was systematically destroyed around them. At approximately 10:15 hours, recognizing that Bismarck would not sink from gunfire alone, Admiral Tovey ordered the cruiser Dorsetshire to close and deliver torpedo attacks. Dorsetshire fired 3 torpedoes, 2 striking the starboard side and 1 the port side. Shortly before 10:40 hours, Bismarck began to list heavily to port. Evidence from survivors and subsequent wreck investigation suggests the crew had opened the ship's seacocks, flooding the vessel deliberately to prevent capture and ensure it sank in deep water where salvage would be impossible. At 10:36 hours, Bismarck capsized to port and sank by the stern. The ship went down in position 48°10 N, 16°12 VW, in water approximately 4,700 meters deep. Of the estimated 2,200 personnel aboard, only 114 survived. Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maui recovered these survivors from the water before withdrawing, due to concerns about U-boat attacks. Kapitän zur See Lindemann was not among the survivors. Multiple witnesses reported seeing him on the bridge in the final minutes, having refused to abandon ship. Admiral Lutyens likewise went down with the ship. The destruction of Bismarck had immediate and lasting effects on German naval strategy. Operation Rheinübung had failed completely. No merchant ships were sunk, and Germany lost its most powerful battleship along with a significant portion of trained naval personnel. Following this disaster, Hitler personally restricted the use of major surface units. The battleship Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, spent most of the war in Norwegian fjords as a fleet in being, tying down British naval resources through its potential threat rather than active operations. Tirpitz conducted only one anti-shipping operation during the entire war, attacking convoy PQ-17 in July 1942, though the convoy scattered before Tirpitz engaged. The heavy cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, which had conducted successful commerce raiding in early 1941, were ordered to remain in French ports. Both ships were damaged by British bombing raids. Gneisenau was damaged beyond economical repair in February 1942. Scharnhorst eventually returned to Norway, but was sunk by British forces in the Battle of North Cape in December 1943. Statistical analysis reveals the limited effectiveness of German surface raiders compared to U-boats. Between 1939 and 1943, German surface ships sank approximately 190 merchant vessels, totaling roughly 850,000 tons. In comparison, U-boats sank approximately 2,800 merchant ships, totaling over 14 million tons during the same period. The resource investment in large surface combatants provided minimal return compared to submarine operations. British naval strategy also evolved from the Bismarck experience. The loss of Hood highlighted the vulnerability of thinly armored capital ships to plunging fire. While no immediate design changes could be implemented for existing vessels, post-war British battleship designs incorporated heavier deck armor. The engagement also validated British investment in aircraft carriers and maritime patrol aircraft. The swordfish attack that crippled Bismarck demonstrated that aircraft could decisively influence naval engagements even against heavily armored targets. This lesson influenced subsequent Royal Navy force structure decisions, prioritizing carrier construction over additional battleships. The wreck of Bismarck remained undiscovered for nearly 5 decades after the ship's sinking. The precise position of the wreck was uncertain, as the position recorded at the time of sinking was based on dead reckoning navigation rather than precise satellite positioning systems that did not exist in 1941. In June 1989, Dr. Robert Ballard led an expedition aboard the research vessel Starella to locate the wreck. Ballard had gained international recognition for locating the wreck of RMS Titanic in 1985. The search for Bismarck utilized similar deep-sea exploration technology. The remote-operated vehicle Argo, equipped with sonar and camera systems capable of operating at depths exceeding 4,000 meters. The expedition located the wreck on June 8, 1989, at a depth of approximately 4,790 meters, some 650 kilometers west of Brest. The wreck sits upright on the seabed, having impacted stern first and then settling onto an even keel. Subsequent expeditions by James Cameron in 2002 provided detailed photographic documentation and forensic analysis of the wreck. This investigation revealed important details about the ship's final moments and the cause of sinking. The wreck shows extensive damage to the superstructure, consistent with the sustained bombardment during the final engagement. All 4 main battery turrets are destroyed or displaced. The bridge and command structure are demolished. However, the armored belt remains largely intact with no significant breaches below the waterline attributable to British gunfire. The stern section shows damage consistent with the torpedo hit from the Swordfish attack on May 26th. The rudders are jammed in the position that prevented steering during the final day of the ship's operational life. Forensic analysis of the hull plating revealed that the ship's bottom plates are detached and distributed around the main wreck, consistent with internal explosions, either from the opening of seacocks or from magazine detonations during the final battle. This evidence supports German survivor accounts that the crew deliberately scuttled the ship to prevent capture. The wreck site is legally protected as a war grave. Under international maritime law and German cultural property regulations, the wreck may not be disturbed and artifacts may not be removed. The approximately 2,000 personnel who went down with the ship remain entombed within and around the wreck. The Hood-Bismarck engagement provides important insights into capital ship combat tactics in the World War II era. Several factors determined the outcome of this brief but decisive action. The British approach tactics reflected Vice Admiral Holland's awareness of Hood's armor vulnerability. The decision to close range rapidly, accepting reduced firepower during the approach, represented sound tactical judgment based on the characteristics of his flagship. However, the misidentification of targets, initially firing at Prince Eugen rather than Bismarck, wasted valuable time and ammunition. The turn to port to bring all guns to bear, executed at 600 hours, exposed Hood to plunging fire at the moment of maximum vulnerability. Whether this turn was necessary at that specific moment, or whether maintaining the closed course for another few minutes would have brought Hood into the flatter trajectory engagement range, where its armor was adequate, remains debated among naval historians. German gunnery excellence contributed significantly to the outcome. Bismarck's 5th salvo achieved a hit after only 6 minutes of combat, a demonstration of effective fire control against a maneuvering target at extreme range in poor visibility conditions. This performance reflected both crew training and the quality of German fire control systems, which used stereoscopic rangefinders with superior light-gathering capability compared to British coincidence rangefinders. The catastrophic nature of Hood's destruction resulted from inherent vulnerabilities in the ship's design. The thin deck armor proved insufficient against modern armor-piercing shells, and the magazine protection was inadequate. Once penetration occurred, the propellant charges stored in the aftermagazines detonated with sufficient force to break the ship's structure. Post-war analysis by naval architects concluded that improved magazine protection, specifically better flash protection between turrets and magazines, might have prevented the catastrophic explosion even if the armor was penetrated. British battleship designs after World War I incorporated such improvements, but Hood, designed during World War I, lacked these features. The engagement also highlighted the importance of material readiness. Prince of Wales engaged with unresolved mechanical defects in its main battery, significantly reducing its combat effectiveness. The decision to deploy a ship with known problems reflected the urgency of intercepting Bismarck, but compromised British firepower at the critical moment. The Bismarck operation occurred at a transitional point in naval warfare. Traditional battleship engagements were becoming obsolete, superseded by carrier-based air power and submarines. The evolution of naval doctrine during World War II increasingly marginalized surface combatants. Prior to World War II, most naval theorists anticipated that decisive fleet engagements between battleships would determine control of sea lanes. The Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and subsequent naval limitation treaties regulated battleship construction specifically because these vessels were considered the primary naval weapons. However, operational experience in World War II demonstrated that aircraft carriers provided more flexible and effective power projection. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, conducted entirely by carrier aircraft, sank or damaged 8 battleships without engaging any Japanese surface combatants. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 saw 4 Japanese aircraft carriers sunk by American carrier aircraft, with no surface engagement between the opposing fleets. In the Atlantic theater, aircraft proved decisive in anti-submarine warfare and in attacking surface raiders. The loss of Bismarck demonstrated that even the most heavily armored battleship was vulnerable to air-launched torpedoes. The sinking of Tirpitz in November 1944 by RAF heavy bombers using specialized tallboy bombs reinforced this lesson. By 1943, the US Navy's construction priorities had shifted decisively toward aircraft carriers. The Essex-class carrier program produced 24 fleet carriers between 1942 and 1946, while battleship construction essentially ceased after the Iowa-class ships were completed. British construction likewise emphasized carriers over battleships after 1942. Submarines proved even more effective in commerce warfare than surface raiders. German U-boats sank approximately 14 million tons of Allied shipping during World War II, compared to less than 1 million tons sunk by surface ships. The resource efficiency of submarines, requiring far less steel, crew and support infrastructure than battleships while achieving greater results, made them the preferred platform for attacking merchant shipping. The obsolescence of battleships became apparent in naval strategy documents from 1945 onward. Post-war US Navy planning emphasized carriers and submarines, with battleships relegated to shore bombardment support roles. The last battleships in active service were the Iowa-class ships, which saw their final combat deployment during the Gulf War in 1991, primarily firing their 16-inch guns in shore bombardment missions. Modern naval warfare has fully transitioned to missiles, aircraft and submarines as primary weapons. No nation has constructed a battleship since World War II, and no battleships remain in active military service worldwide. The era that Bismarck represented, massive armored surface combatants engaging in gun duels, ended in the Atlantic in May 1941. The historical significance of Bismarck's final operation lies not in its success, it failed completely, but in its demonstration that even the most powerful surface warship could not survive against a determined opponent with superior numbers and control of the air-sea environment. This lesson shaped naval strategy for the remainder of the 20th century and continues to influence maritime doctrine today.